Okay, we are recording now. So again, this webinar is intended to go over the process for creating custom Sugars shapes for the stations that Sugars has in the program. If you should be able to see my screen right now. You can see a heat exchanger, very simple model. There's only one station in this model. And so heat exchanger is just one example, but there are lots of stations within Sugars that have a set of shape drawings available in the Sugar stencil. So if you click on the heat exchanger shapes, there's a whole list of heat exchangers in the stencil, and there are several different types that come with the Sugars program. And the same thing applies for, pans, centrifugals, those sorts of things. But what if you have a special type of heat exchanger that you're modeling and you want it to show up on your model drawing looking like your special kind? The way to do that is to actually create your own shape and then set it up to be a Sugar station, and that's what we're going to go through today. And I just want to make it clear from the beginning here that all of this information is in the Sugars help files. So if you look at the Sugars help system, just by clicking on the help button here in Sugars, you'll get this pop up here, and under station modules, there's a section called Designing Your Own Shapes, and it goes through the entire process in pretty good detail. So that's basically the process that we're going to follow here now. That way you'll get to see it in real life, and then if you need to refer back, you do have the help files available. So to start with, like I said, we have a heat exchanger here, but what if we want it to look like something else? And the great thing about Visio is that we can make our drawing anything we want. So I'm going to move over to the side here just a little bit in this drawing, and I'm going to draw my own shape that I want to be a heat exchanger. And the drawing tools are right up here. If I hit this drop down next to that little rectangle, I get several drawing tools that I can choose from. I'm going to choose the ellipse tool here, and I'm going to make a circle. And I'm going to fill my circle with yellow and give it a black border with these tools up here. And again, we're not going to spend a ton of time on Visio drawing tools today, but that's how they work. So I have a circle now, and let's say I want to add some stuff in the middle of that circle, like maybe an arc. Okay, that went the opposite direction I want it to, so I'm going to then make it a black line. Move that one over here. And then if I copy it, and paste it, and then I'm going to rotate it. And let me do another one here, and another one here. Let's see, I need to make that one black. And as you can see, I've made a very crude smiley face here. And the point is just to illustrate the fact that your Sugar shapes, our Sugar stations, can be based on any shape that you want. In my case, a smiley face. But you could make it whatever you want. The drawing options are pretty much unlimited in Visio. So here we have a smiley face. This is going to be a heat exchanger, right? So in Sugars, the first thing you need to know about building your own shapes is that you need Visio to be in developer mode. So you can see I have the developer tab up here at the top of my Visio window. And there are a lot of options here. How do I get developer turned on? If you go to File, Options, and click Advanced, and then scroll all the way to the bottom, there's this little checkbox right here that says Run in Developer Mode. You'll need that checked in order to have your developer tab available in the ribbon. So of course I do already here, but just make sure of that before you start this process. So if I cancel there, so I have my shape already, but as you know, sugar stations require flow streams to be connected on the inputs and outputs in order to work. So we have to give this shape connection points. So the first thing we have to do before we can connect them or set up the connection points is group this shape. So I'm going to select the whole thing, pointer tool, select. So now I've just selected all the elements of the drawing, and I'm going to go back to the developer tab, and under shape design, I can group that shape. So now the shape moves and behaves as one large element instead of all the individual elements of that shape that I drew to begin with. Okay, so now I need to add the connection points. So if I go back to home, this little X right here next to the pointer tool and the connector tool and below the shape drawing tool, that's your connection point tool. So if I click on that, now I get this border around my shape. And you'll notice if I go to the edge of my shape, I get a tiny X next to my cursor. If I hold down the control key, now I get a plus next to my cursor. If I click, now I have a little dot there. Now that is a connection point. So I'm gonna do that 4 times because for a heat exchanger I need 2 inputs and 2 outputs. So keeping that in mind, I have to hold down the control key, and you can see there's a little target that shows right where it's going to land. So if I click with the control key down, I get another connection point. I'm just going to work my way around and make 4 of those. So now they're pretty small. I admit they're a little bit difficult to see, but we don't even see them if I go away from there. But if I click on this, you can see my connection points are just barely visible there. Okay, so those are required. You have to make sure that you know the correct number of connection points necessary for the sugar shape that you're drawing, or sugar station, I should say. So in this case, for a heat exchanger, there's 2 inputs and 2 outputs, so we need a total of 4 connection points. But if it were a different shape that had more connection points or fewer, you would need to make sure that your number of connection points matches the number that sugars requires. Okay. The next thing that sugars needs in any shape representing a station is a text field, so that whenever you drop the shape onto your drawing, it can put the shape number in the shape. So we're going to come back here to the pointer tool and select. And Sugars comes with a neat little tool for adding a properly formatted field to a shape for that text to be located. So this is called the Smart Shape Wizard. And I'm going to go to my Sugars installation directory. So if I go to C, Program Files x86, Sugars, and under Utilities, you'll find this little Smart Shape Wizard application here. So what you need to do is before you go there, make sure that you have your sugar shape highlighted, selected here, and then come back, double click the Smart Shape Wizard, and you have some options in the Smart Shape Wizard, but what we're doing here is customizing the shape's text, because we need that text box for Sugars to place the station number in. So we're going to customize the shape text. Go to Change Option, and you can set what location in the shape the text shows up. I want it in the middle for a station number. You can show or set how it gets aligned. It can go rotating with the shape, or in this case, I'd rather have it stay level as I rotate the shape, so I can always read the station number straight across. You can also have it follow gravity as well. And then you can have options whether the font stays the same or expands or contracts with the shape. I want it to stay the same for this one. And now that we've set all the options, we click Next. And you can either have the Smart Shape Wizard copy the shape and apply your settings, or you can have it apply to the original shape you had selected. In this case, we don't need to make another copy. We're going to apply it to the shape that we selected. So when I click Finish, now I go back to Visio, I have a text block in the middle of my shape. And again, you could just simply add a text block manually, but using the Smart Shape Wizard allows you to set up all of the kind of aesthetic settings that work well within a Sugars diagram. So the next thing that you need to do is somehow we have to tell Sugars that this is a Sugars station and not just a drawing shape in Visio. And the way we do that is with the shape sheet. So I right-clicked on the grouped shape and go to Show Shape Sheet. And as you can see, we bring up a whole bunch of data associated with that shape. And this is Visio's way of keeping track of all the information associated with a shape. You can see it's got a size and placement and all sorts of things. But in this case, we're not interested in that as much as we're interested in some custom information that has to do with Sugars. So we're going to go up to, let's see, remind myself here, user-defined cells, insert in the sections. Yes, so right here under Shapesheet Design, or in the Design ribbon, under the Sections group, there's an Insert button. And when we click that, we get a whole list of Shapesheet sections that we can insert for this shape. And we want the first one. We want to insert some user-defined cells for this shape. So I click OK, and the first thing I get is a new section called User-Defined Cells. Now here's one of the very important key things in this process is we have to give this user-defined cell the name of the Sugars station that it needs to represent. And that's how Sugars is going to know whether it's a heat exchanger or a pan or an evaporator or whatever it is. So we have to make sure and get that correct. Now, I might know offhand what that name should be for a heat exchanger, but I might also forget. So what I'm going to do to be sure that I know I'm doing the correct thing is I'm going to come back to this other heat exchanger, right-click, Show Shape Sheet. And this was the one that came directly from Sugars, so I know it's correct. So I've got this second shape sheet popped up down here in my window. If I scroll down just a little bit, you can see that the user-defined cell name, the class name for a heat exchanger is SI_heater. So I'm going to go to that same. So the first thing I need to do is call this class. And then the second thing that I need to do is come to the value, and you adjust the values up here in this bar. It's kind of like Excel. It has an entry bar at the top of the screen. So I'm going to give it quotation mark SI_heater. Hit enter. So now this user-defined cell matches the user-defined class cell that the heat exchanger from Sugars had. And Sugars will automatically add the ID for the station number and all the shape data later. So we don't have to do any of that. We just have to give it this class value so that when we drop it on a sheet or on a Sugars drawing, Sugars knows that this is a heat exchanger, not just a plain drawing with no automation. Okay, so we got that completed. Now the next thing we need to do is label the connection points, because Sugars needs to know which connection point refers to which input and output so that it sends the flow streams to the correct portion of the calculations. So let's shrink the shape sheet just a little bit, expand the drawing a little bit, so hopefully we can see it all. And not quite, we'll have to zoom out just a tiny bit. There we go. Okay, so when I click one of the connection points in the shape sheet, you can see that I get a black box highlighting the connection point that I've clicked on the drawing. Okay, so this is the top of my smiley face, is this connection point right here. So I need to decide which connection point I want that to be in the model. So for a heat exchanger, we have input 0 and input 1. Input 0 is the juice or the fluid to be heated, and input 1 is the steam or other heating medium. And I think I want the top of my my shape to be where the steam comes in. So I'm going to call this input 1. Okay, and I think, let's see this next one. Okay, on the left side of my shape, I want that to be where the juice comes in. So I'm going to call that, and I can adjust, I can do it by double clicking here or typing in on the bar at the top, but input 0, and then hit enter, and it saves. And then I do the same thing for outputs. Let's see the bottom. That's probably where I want my condensate to come out. So output 1. And on the right side is where I'd like my juice to come out. So output 0. So now, using the shape sheet, I have defined which connection points on my shape associate with which sugars input and output. And if you have more or less inputs and outputs, you'll need to define them all so that sugars knows which flow streams should be connected and how the calculations should proceed within the station. Okay, so now we're done with the shape sheet. We can close it. And I'll go ahead and maximize so we can see the drawing a little better now. So now we have created a sugars heat exchanger shape. What we need to do with it now is we need to save it in a stencil. You could save it in one of the sugar stencils that's installed with the program, but we recommend against that because if you were to ever need to reinstall sugars or upgrade, that stencil would get overwritten and you would lose your custom shape. So what's better to do is to come up here and click on more shapes in the stencils pane and come to new stencil, and essentially just you created a new stencil, and this can be for custom drawings. So we're going to take this shape, and all we have to do is select it and drag it and drop it into that stencil. Now you'll notice it just says master.2 right now. So we'd like to give it a good name. So if I go to master properties, I can name it. So I'm going to call this Happy HeatX since it's a heat exchanger that looks like a smiley face. And I can give it a prompt, which is the little pop-up that happens when you hover over it. So now I've given it the name and the prompt you can see when you hover with your mouse over it. Okay, now we need to save this stencil so we don't lose the new shape. You can save it wherever you like. I've got a folder set up for this webinar, so so now I've saved my stencil and my shape is saved in that stencil. Okay, so now how do we use it? Well, if you've opened a sugars drawing, you just want to go and open that stencil using this menu right here, so we can see, I'll show you where it got saved. Documents. Here, so right here is where that stencil got saved. So if it wasn't already open, I'd open it from right here. And now I have it. Now let's use it. What I'm going to do is, you can see this model is balanced right now using a regular sugars heat exchanger shape. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect all the connectors from this shape. And I'm going to delete the shape. Then I'm going to drag my new shape in, which turns out is quite a bit bigger than my existing one was. And now, because we gave it a station ID, Sugars knows that this is a Sugars station, so it needs an ID number. So I'm going to make it station 100. And just like any regular Sugars station, it turns blue because it still needs a name. So I double click it. And I want my output temperature to be 85 degrees C. So now I just need to connect my connectors to this new station. Go ahead and move this down here. You see the connection points show up whenever I come close with a flow stream. So we're going to find out if I got the inputs and outputs defined correctly here. Just a second. Okay. So as we defined them, this should be input 0. This should be output 0. This should be input 1 and output 1. 0 is your juice or whatever stream is to be heated. 1 is your heating medium and your condensate. Okay. So right now, the model says it's imbalanced because we just changed stations. So let's balance the model. And as you can see, the model balanced, and none of the values actually changed because everything is set the same. All we did was swap out the Sugars provided shape drawing for heat exchanger with our little smiley face heat exchanger shape. But the calculations behind them are the same. We're just using a different visual representation of the heat exchanger. Now I could go in here and I could change my output temperature to 80, rebalance, and now the juice output is 80 and we're using a little less steam. So anyway, that's a example of how you can draw your own shapes to represent sugar stations and then save them in a stencil so you have them to use again and again in all of your Sugars modeling. I appreciate everybody joining us today. I'm going to open it up for questions real quick here, and it actually would work best if you can type your questions in the chat window. I'll give just a few minutes here if anybody has anything they'd like me to address. And if not, then we'll wrap up here. But just wait and see if anyone has any questions. Okay, well, it looks like there are no questions today. So again, thanks for joining. We will post this recording as a YouTube video, and we'll send out the link to everyone who registered for the webinar. And again, we'll probably have another webinar here in just a few months. We try and cover just one interesting or maybe challenging Sugars modeling subject every so often. So if you have suggestions, if you have something you're interested in seeing, don't hesitate to send us a message and just let us know, because we're here to help all of our customers. So again, oh, I do see a question here. So it says, is there a limit on the text size or can we make a tiny receiver to connect streams on a PID type drawing? I think the only limit would be how close together you can put your connection points and still be able to individually connect streams to them. I think the minimum font size in Visio is going to be something like 6-point. Yeah. So that'll be your station number would show up at 6-point font. And you could set up in the SmartShape wizard for the font to shrink with the shape. So once you create it, you can shrink it down as small as possible. But again, I think as you create that shape, you'll want to just make sure that the connection points for the receiver are far enough apart that you can still get them connected. And I do believe on a receiver, if you're building a custom shape for that, you don't have to give it all 10 input connection points. You can give it as few as 2 and just make them number 0 and number 1, and Sugars will handle that okay. I've seen that before. So hopefully that answers the question. Okay, looks like we're good. So again, thanks everybody for joining, and we'll post the recording. And as always, let us know if you need any assistance. We're here to help. Again, have a good day. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you.